A verdict is given in the Derek Chauvin trial. We go into what we can see from that, what's the future of that particular trial, as well as the potential for riots across the country in the upcoming week. This is your April 21st Not So News update. Please like and subscribe if you're looking for daily news content, and let's dive on in. We're going to be starting with a summary of today's events, as well as the stuff for, I guess, the last week, coming from ABC News. So the jury reached a verdict, and they deliberated for 10.5 hours. This was 4 hours on Monday, 6.5 hours on Tuesday. This is relatively short in terms of jury deliberations, which generally means it's either like a very obvious innocent or a very obvious guilty. In this case, we're leaning towards the latter. Chauvin was found guilty on all accounts. I was actually a little bit surprised about this. I assumed this manslaughter would be definitely held. I was a little bit questionable about the 2 murder charges. So what does this mean? His bail is revoked. He is taken into custody today, which means that he does start serving his time today, even though sentencing doesn't happen for another, I believe it's 8 weeks. Yeah, 8 weeks that are expected to do sentencing hearings. The maximum sentence for the second-degree murder, which is the highest charge, which the way that sentencing works, you always serve, all your times together. So the longest sentence is the one that you will be staying for. The maximum sentence is 40 years. Under Minnesota sentencing, I believe he's estimated to do 150 months, which ends up being about 12 to 13 years. Based on there being other charges with it, there's a possibility for it to be a little bit more. Regardless, it's probably going to be no more than 15 years. And that's essentially it for the ABC summary. The big issue, though, is there the possibility for a mistrial? Earlier in the week, the Minnesota Walz declared a state of emergency prior to Derek Chauvin verdict. This was that a state of emergency was called in Minnesota as a result of the jury expected to come to a decision. You have to remember, this was also at the same time that we reported on other politicians that were making noise, and there was already a warning for the mistrial. So Governor Tim Walz, a Minnesota Democrat, declared a state of emergency Monday night. The counties around Minneapolis, as they prepared for the verdict of the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Fox News reported that Walz had a news conference to lay out his plan to maintain security. He said the state is bringing in police back from Nebraska and Ohio. The report pointed out that Minnesota Senate approved $9 million in emergency funding to deal with potential unrest. We can't live like this, he said. We simply can't be, but we can't have thousands of businesses burned and people put at risk. The murder case against Chauvin in the death of George Floyd went to the jury Monday. The jury of 6 white people, 6 people who are black or multiracial, began deliberating after nearly a full day of closing arguments. I'm not sure why Fox felt the need to report on the race of the jury members, but whatever. Earlier today, we also had Biden says he's praying for a guilty verdict in Chauvin trial. This is just another big name politician that, felt the need to, give their opinion on the, how a jury should be coming out. We had Maxine Waters earlier this week, and then we have this report from Politico. President Joe Biden said Tuesday he was praying for a guilty verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin as the jury continues its second day of deliberations over the fate of former Minneapolis police officer who killed George Floyd. Although White House sought to downplay the significance of the president's remark later in the afternoon, they nevertheless represented some of the most opinionated comments he had offered on Chauvin's trial since it began in late March. Biden knew that he had waited until the Chauvin jury had been sequestered before making his own feelings about the criminal case public. I'm praying the verdict is the right verdict, which I think is it's overwhelming in my view. He told reporters in the Oval Office, I wouldn't say that unless the jury was sequestered now, not hearing me say that. I personally think this type of remark is absolutely inappropriate, regardless of what evidence is, out there or whatever, regardless if the jury is sequestered or not. Because obviously the jury's going to come out. What happens if the jury members, come out of, being sequestered and find that, there's the president of the United States thinks that you're obviously wrong? That seems wildly inappropriate in my mind, and just seems to be an attack on, the judicial system. This was after the judge in Derek Chauvin trial says Representative Maxine Waters' comments may be grounds for appeal. This is even being reported by CNN that Maxine Waters' comments may have actually helped the defense. We're looking at the possibility that even though Derek Derek Chauvin was found guilty today, that him and his attorneys can be filing for mistrials based off of the comments solely from Maxine Waters, and Biden just added further fire that could lead to the possibility that the jury members felt threatened that they had to find a guilty verdict or else their lives would be at risk. The judge overseeing the former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin trial and the death of George Floyd said Monday that Representative Maxine Waters' comments could be grounds for appealing a verdict in the trial. I'll give you that Congressman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned, Judge Patrikios told defense attorney Eric Nelson on one day. I personally think that this is even downplaying what the judge had as comments. He went as far as saying that the remarks from the politicians was entirely inappropriate and an attack on the judicial branch of government. The judicial branch is a co-equal branch of government, and the jury in this state part is meant to be impartial, and a representative commenting on how a jury should find, in my opinion, is entirely inappropriate regardless if you agree or disagree with the jury. Waters on Saturday night had called for protesters to stay on the street and get more confrontational if Chauvin is acquitted for Floyd's killing. Comments immediately seized on by Republicans who claim that Waters was inciting violence. The California Democrat said she was in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota to show her support for protesters amid ongoing protests over the police killings of Daunte Wright and also to support his family. We've got to stay in the street and demand justice, Waters said to reporters, according to a video on social media. The defense did move for a mistrial Monday, which is pretty common, and Nelson noted that the trial had not been in the news, but recently introduced 2 fictional TV shows where he described the threats against the sanctity of the jury process by Waters over the weekends. We have to remember, even though the jury was asked to not watch the news, I remember that it was even on Grey's Anatomy this last week that they essentially made a reference to this about how awful it was that a police officer, killed another individual, and made, remarks that, mirrored this exact George Floyd and Derek Chauvin scenario. Pelosi made comments that are being reported by Daily Caller as fairly inappropriate. Pelosi said, "Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your lives for justice. Because of you and because of thousands of millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous with justice." I think this is rather distasteful personally to, thank, an individual for dying. Obviously, I think what we've seen over the last months is the need for some type of reform around policing, but this still seems like just it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Finally, there's the scare for potential riots still. Even after the trial was getting out, this incident was reported on social media with a truck that was going by the court who got stuck in traffic, and after trying to get through, people jump on the truck and start just stopping the mob. They start hitting the windows. The driver, someone jumps on the hood of the truck, and the driver eventually tries to back up to get him out, but they're currently being blocked off by a car that just kind of stopped in the middle of the road. Obviously, what we see here is everyone's still on unrest, even though that a guilty verdict was filed. This is what was being reported earlier in this week, that no matter the result of this trial, we're expecting riots and protests. I'm currently recording this on Tuesday afternoon around 7 p.m. Eastern time. Obviously, it's still very early for any type of riots or whatever to be starting nationally, and we might have more to report tomorrow on what actually happens out there, but I'm fully expecting there to be violence, riots, mobs, and regardless, even though a guilty verdict was found. Part of rioting is also celebrating, and I think everyone recognizes that. It'll be interesting to see, as we reported earlier, that there was new funding being given to the area to try and stop businesses from burning, but unfortunately this is what our country has come to, that we can't even allow the judicial system to no longer be politicized, and unfortunately that's just the country we currently live in. And this is your April 21st Not to News update. Once again, please like and subscribe if you're looking for daily news content, and have a good one.